A few years ago, I was at a company awards dinner. An American colleague of mine won a major award, and he got up on stage and delivered this powerful, heartfelt speech. He talked about the late nights, the sacrifices, the moment he almost gave up but pushed through. It was a classic hero's journey, with him as the undeniable star. The room erupted in applause. We were all moved. He earned it. A little later, an award was given to a visiting executive from our Tokyo office. She walked to the podium, and the room quieted down again. But instead of a speech, she just gave a small, deep bow. She said something very brief, which was then translated. It was along the lines of, "I am only here because of the support of my team and my clients. This is for them. Thank you." And that was it. Honestly, the contrast was jarring. My immediate cynical thought was that she was being performatively humble. After the passionate story of individual struggle and triumph, her quiet deflection felt anticlimactic, maybe even a little weak. But that feeling didn't sit right with me. The way she said it felt utterly sincere. It wasn't about her not having worked hard. It was as if she was seeing a whole network of invisible hands that had lifted her up, while all we saw was her, standing alone at the podium. I realized I wasn't just watching two different speeches. I was witnessing two completely different ways of seeing the world. And it made me wonder, what did she see that we didn't? Okay, let's unpack this. The answer to that question, the key to understanding what that executive saw, it lies in the Japanese cultural lens of collective support, encapsulated in one profound phrase, Okagesama de. This deep dive is about exploring that concept, the visible thanks to invisible support, and how it shapes everything from, personal struggle and recovery to the structure of modern corporate life. We're going to be investigating the influence of this concept on organizational culture, employee recognition, and maybe even the development of what you might call humble leadership.
That stark contrast you witnessed, it really is fundamental. It affirms this philosophical divide between two models of achievement. The individual hero, the one who succeeds despite the world.
Right, the lone wolf narrative.
Exactly. Versus the achievement being seen as a result of an intricate, often unseen, network of causes and conditions. So your American colleague, he really embraced that self-starter narrative.
Totally.
While the Japanese executive acknowledged the structure, the system that enabled her. Our mission today is really to look at the influence of Okagesama in modern contexts, specifically contrasting it with these Western individualistic models of success, recovery, and even organizational commitment. We'll dive deep into the philosophical practices that forged this worldview. It's about understanding why recognizing the entire support structure is actually considered the higher form of achievement in that context.
Okay, so let's start with the phrase itself, Okagesama de. When you just hear it translated simply as thanks to you, it feels like you lose so much.
Oh, absolutely. That simple translation, thanks to you, it's functional, sure, but philosophically, it's almost empty compared to the original.
Right, it misses the weight.
It does. To really grasp its power, we have to deconstruct the components. They really give you the literal blueprint for this cultural view. First off, it is fundamentally a polite and honorific phrase.
Okay.
You have the prefix o, which makes the following word polite, and then the suffix sama, which is the highest honorific marker, applying it to deities or really revered figures.
Wow. Okay. So it's inherently respectful.
Highly respectful. Then there's the particle de, which indicates the means, translating roughly to by or with. But the real core, the beating heart of the phrase, is the noun kage, spelled K-A-G-E.
And kage, that literally means shadow or shade, right? That seems key.
That is the critical insight. Yes. Yeah. Shadow or shade. That's where the metaphor starts to feel really powerful. It suggests being protected maybe from a harsh sun, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like finding relief.
So Okagesama de literally means something like by the honorable shadow or with the esteemed shade. When native Japanese speakers use shadow here, they're using it as a metaphor for all those supportive factors. Someone's help, their active support, or maybe even just their benevolent presence, their existence.
Huh. So it's not a negative thing, like lurking in the shadows.
Not at all. Think of standing under a big, sprawling tree on a really hot day. You're benefiting from the cage, the shade it provides.
Yeah.
And you don't have to thank every single leaf individually, right? You appreciate the whole tree, the shelter it gives.
By the shadow. That framing, it really flips the focus completely, doesn't it? Instead of celebrating the individual success, the flower, maybe,
right,
you're celebrating the soil, the water, the canopy, the whole support system.
Precisely. The metaphorical insight is that the speaker was able to succeed because of this protective or sustaining shade. And that shade could be provided by other people, or maybe just more broadly, by favorable conditions, by circumstances. The executive in your story, she wasn't denying her own effort.
Yeah.
Not at all.
No, it didn't feel like that.
She was affirming that her effort only became fruitful because the entire support system, that protective shade, the cage, was in place and working. Without the cage, maybe she felt she would have just, withered in the heat.
This makes the idea of gratitude feel so much bigger than just a simple transaction. Like if I thank you for doing a specific task well, I'm giving you the credit. But if I say Okagesama day, I'm acknowledging that the whole environment you helped create allowed me to succeed. It's less direct, almost.
That's the critical nuance, yes. How the gratitude is directed. It's often intentionally diffuse. We see this used a lot in contexts like Japanese self-help groups.
Yeah.
Specifically within abstinence groups like danshukai.
Okay, like for alcohol recovery.
Exactly. When members use Okagesama Day to talk about their recovery, their sobriety, they're often referring neither to a specific counselor nor to a single, easily definable group process that fixed them.
So they aren't necessarily thanking, say, the person who led the meeting that week or the sponsor who gave them a ride.
Not directly, or at least not only them. It's bigger than that.
Yeah.
The phrase is expressing this profound gratitude for the whole confluence of unseen causes and conditions that enabled their progress, their sobriety.
Unseen causes and conditions. What does that actually encompass?
It could be anything, really.
Yeah.
The stability of the economy that allowed the group to rent a meeting space. The general health of the community that provides that space, the historical context, maybe the prior generations who established that particular recovery method.
Wow.
Or even just the sheer fact of a new day dawning, another chance. It focuses on the support system itself. It deliberately avoids isolating a single helper who might then, consciously or unconsciously expect praise or recognition.
So it prevents individuals from becoming recovery heroes.
In a way, yes. It's a recognition of systemic grace, you could say. A vast enabling mechanism that provided the essential protective cage.
It sounds almost cosmological, like acknowledging the entire universe that had to align just right for that specific moment of success or sobriety to happen. It demands a level of humility that feels, well, frankly, pretty alien to our Western emphasis on personal branding and taking ownership of your achievement.
It really demands the recognition that the individual is just one part of a very complex, interdependent whole.
Yeah.
If you genuinely believe your success is due to the shadow of others, the cage, then you inherently have to diminish the self-importance of your own singular effort, even if that effort was immense.
So the executive at the dinner, she understood the award wasn't just for her.
Exactly. It was for the entire supportive ecosystem that allowed her eventually to stand there in the light. The cage made the light possible, in her view.
Okay, so if that philosophy of collective support, this Okagesama mindset, is so deeply ingrained, it must fundamentally change how Japanese organizations approach things like managing health, productivity, success, especially compared to the, let's say, rugged individualism we often see in Western corporate culture.
Oh, absolutely. The Western model tends to spotlight and reward the exceptional individual, right? The star performer.
The 10X engineer or the top salesperson.
Precisely. The Japanese model, based on what we've just discussed, seems geared towards rewarding the successful collective structure itself. And that contrast is shown really vividly in modern Japanese corporate behavior, particularly in their approach to health and productivity management.
And you're saying this isn't just about, offering gym memberships. It's deeper.
Much deeper. It's an institutionalized application of the Okagesama mindset. They recognize that for the organization to succeed sustainably, it needs a stable, sustained support system for all its components. They treat employees and their families not as external factors or separate concerns, but as a unified, supported entity. The whole unit collectively enables the business.
How does that look in practice, then? How do they actually institutionalize this collective buffer, starting from the top?
Well, the commitment often starts right in the leadership structure. It's not uncommon to see large organizations explicitly appointing the president or the representative director as the chief health officer.
The CEO is also the CHO. That's unusual.
It is from a Western perspective, but it's not just symbolic. It underscores that institutional commitment to wellness is a strategic priority, managed from the absolute highest level of command. It shifts health management from being, maybe a secondary HR task.
Right, compliance or benefits administration.
To being a core business strategy. It signals that the health of the collective is the direct responsibility of the leader.
And you mentioned it extends beyond the employee to the family unit. That seems critical.
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
The official health management mandate, the policy, explicitly aims to maintain and improve the health of employees and their families. This is a massive philosophical difference. A Western company might offer, say, an employee assistance program if an employee is dealing with a family crisis.
Reactive support.
Exactly, reactive. A Japanese company, operating under these principles of Okagesama, recognizes that the stability of the family unit is the shadow, the cage, that directly supports the business operations. If that shadow is weak or unstable, the object casting the light, the employee, will inevitably suffer. Therefore, the company feels it must invest in maintaining that entire supportive environment.
Okay, let's get specific. What kind of initiatives are we talking about? You mentioned they're wide-ranging, and participation rates are apparently very high.
They are remarkably high. The initiatives are holistic, focusing on both physical and mental readiness, you could say. On the physical side, they actively promote integrated health through pretty simple, consistent measures. Things like signs recommending taking the stairs, organized walking or running events, regular basic health checks. But crucially, these aren't just passive offerings sitting on an intranet somewhere.
Right, they're actively pushed.
Actively tracked and encouraged. We see these, frankly, astonishing statistics like 88.2% participation in simple diagnosis checks for gait and posture in fiscal year 2023.
88%. In a gait check, that's hard to imagine in many Western offices, maybe 10%, like you said, if you're lucky.
Precisely. And that high participation rate, it reflects the cultural expectation that maintaining your own health isn't just a personal benefit, it's a contribution to the company's collective stability. It's almost like a low-key, continuous form of shugi that spiritual practice we'll discuss more later applied to the workplace. It signals that conforming to these wellness standards is necessary to ensure the structural cage, the supportive shadow, remains strong for everyone else.
Okay, and what about the mental health side? That often seems harder to manage, especially in a collective-focused setting where individual struggles might be less visible.
It's treated with the same level of seriousness. They conduct mandatory stress checks. And critically, they provide guidance and support not just for individuals who flag as high stress, but for entire high-stress departments.
So they look at the team dynamic, the workload.
They look at the system. A participation rate of 99.7% in stress checks is basically universal engagement. By targeting the whole department, the company is implicitly saying, the stress here is likely a systemic issue, maybe workload, maybe management style, maybe resources, not just an individual failing. And the system itself must provide the shade necessary to cool that department down.
That focus on providing really extensive support systems, especially around work-life balance, must represent a significant financial investment. It really signals a long-term view of the employee.
It's a profound demonstration of Okagesama in action, yes. They consistently exceed statutory requirements, acting as that proactive shade provider. For example, offering childcare leave up to 18 months, when the statutory minimum might be 12 months, shows they're willing to bear an extra cost or burden to ensure the employee's long-term stability and return.
That's a big difference.
It is. And the flexible short working hour system, allowing work between 5 and 7 hours a day in 30-minute increments for parents with young children, is similarly generous. It reflects a deep institutional understanding that life demands flexibility, and the company should be the resilient framework that provides it. Even things like nursing care leave for elder care might be extended significantly, say to 155 days, far exceeding a legal minimum like 93 days.
And there was that initiative you mentioned targeting fathers taking leave. That seems particularly vital for modernizing this concept of cage, especially for supporting women balancing careers and family.
That's a fascinating and very modern application. HR doesn't just passively allow fathers to take leave. They actively send communications about the available work-life balance systems, along with congratulations, directly to both the new father and his manager.
So the manager is explicitly looped in and expected to support it.
Exactly. This communication loop is essential. It institutionalizes the expectation that male employees should participate in childcare. It's not just an option, it's supported. By supporting the father in taking leave, they're supporting the other employee, often the mother, and thereby supporting the stability of the entire collective workforce. It shifts the burden of negotiating work-life balance away from the individual employee and makes it a supported institutional norm.
This level of systemic, proactive support feels completely at odds with the Western narrative of self-transformation we often hear, especially in stories of personal struggle or, say, addiction recovery.
It really defines the conflict perfectly. Western individualism, drawing on deep historical roots like, Puritan theology or the rags to riches myth, it champions the redemptive self. The story is almost always one of a profound, singular transformation achieved by individual will. Often there's a dramatic confession, repentance of a perceived sin or failure, and then emergence as a completely new, morally sound person. The individual achieves success despite their past and despite the system.
Right, the lone hero again. But in the Japanese recovery context, particularly within some Alcoholics Anonymous groups there, this can lead to something you call the endurance trap. What's that about?
Exactly. The dominant cultural assumption, a very powerful value, is gamburu. It means to endure, to persist, to grit your teeth and push through.
Okay, perseverance.
Perseverance, yes. But when applied to addiction recovery without a deeper philosophical framework, this can mean members focus intensely, almost solely, on gamburu, on enduring the absence of alcohol. Critics point out that this often results in just perpetual existence without alcohol. They're eternally enduring the lack, the craving, but they aren't necessarily achieving the deep identity-level transformation or the kind of spiritual recovery often described in Western models.
So they feel like they're just white-knuckling it indefinitely.
That's a good way to put it. They feel they're merely surviving the addiction day by day, rather than having truly moved past it or transformed because of it.
That sounds absolutely exhausting. You've basically just traded the pain of active addiction for the chronic pain of ceaseless conscious endurance.
It is a heavy psychological burden, yes. It tends to maintain the self as essentially flawed or broken, needing constant vigilance, constant gamburu, just to keep the beast at bay. However, this is where the specifically Japanese abstinence group, Danshukai, introduces what they see as a more proactive, potentially transformative solution, the concept of denshudu.
Denshudu, so the way of abstinence.
Exactly. The addition of that do suffix is crucial. It's the same do as in judo, kendo, sado.
The path or the way?
Precisely. It changes abstinence from being a passive endurance, a grim survival exercise, into an active, potentially spiritual quest. The do suffix is one of the most powerful organizing principles in Japanese culture. It takes an everyday activity, sword fighting, kendo, tea preparation, sado, even calligraphy, shodu, and elevates it into a spiritual discipline aimed at profound self-mastery and transformation.
So by framing it as Danshudu, members can shift the focus.
They can shift the focus away from simple gamburo, just gritting their teeth and surviving, to embarking on a rigorous spiritual path. They're seeking mastery, discipline, and perhaps philosophical depth through the practice of abstinence itself. This framing, this way, offers a potential route to bypass the psychological dead end of the endurance trap. It's about finding meaning and growth in the abstinence, not just surviving its absence.
Okay, so this idea of Danshu, this dedicated path of mastery through abstinence, it leads us towards what feels like the core philosophical engine behind this whole Japanese view of self-development, the concept of shugi.
Yes, absolutely.
It seemed like shugi is the practice, the discipline, that ultimately makes the kind of collective humility we see in Okagesama possible, or at least understandable.
I think that's a very insightful connection. Shugi is the central idea underpinning essentially all the do forms, these ways we just mentioned. And it's far more intense than just training or practice, as we might casually use the words. It's closer to a spiritual apprenticeship or even a form of ascetic practice.
Ascetic, so involving hardship.
Yes, the cultural premise is quite clear. The harder something is to learn, the more effort it requires, the more physically demanding the process is, the more inherently valuable and deeply understood the resulting knowledge will be. Difficulty isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the measure of worth.
That directly challenges, say, the modern Western academic model, which often prioritizes speed, efficiency, intellectual comprehension above all else. We want the shortcut, the hack, the fastest route to the solution. Shugyup seems to value the longest, hardest route.
It often does, because Shugi places a fundamental priority on direct experience over abstract verbal logic. This idea has deep roots, particularly in Zen Buddhist thought, encapsulated in the phrase Furi Monji, literally, not standing on words or letters.
Don't rely on words.
Exactly. It's a deep-seated warning against relying purely on intellectual analysis, on doctrine, on texts. The idea is that true enlightenment, true understanding Satori, is attained through direct embodied experience, not by analyzing texts or intellectualizing concepts.
Yeah.
If you can explain it perfectly, logically, but you haven't lived it, haven't felt it in your bones, you don't truly know it in the way that matters for transformation.
So words and logic are seen as potentially dangerous. Like they can become distractions that prevent genuine, deep understanding. You can talk yourself out of doing the hard work, maybe.
Precisely. You can rationalize anything.
Yeah.
And this leads directly to the central practice methodology, kara de oboru,
Kara de obora.
which means memorizing with the body. Knowledge, under the principle of shugige, must be obtained not just through the brain, the cognitive center, but through the body, through your hands, your feet, through endless, often painful, physical repetition. You're training the whole being, aiming for a state of what's sometimes called body-mind oneness.
Can you give a practical example of that? How does memorizing with the body translate into actual life philosophy, maybe back in that recovery context?
The recovery philosophy offers a perfect, stark contrast to many Western approaches. The instruction often given in these contexts is something like, don't think about why you have to stop drinking. Stop drinking first and then feel what happens to your body.
Feel it physically.
Otherwise, the saying goes, your intellectual knowledge will not help you in your real life. It's a direct command. Bypass the intellectualizing brain. Disregard the cognitive excuses, the academic analyses of addiction, the verbal strategies. Focus purely on the embodied experience of abstinence, the physical reality of the change in your system.
That is profound. It suggests that all the knowledge, all the theory in the world is ultimately useless unless the body has been physically trained, often through painful repetition, to execute the change almost without thinking.
That's the very essence of the Shugi apprenticeship model. No master can teach you satori, enlightenment, or deep skill. You must obtain it yourself through relentless, embodied practice. The knowledge only becomes truly useful, truly integrated, when it becomes instinctual, when the body simply knows what to do, eliminating that mental space where rationalization, hesitation, or temptation thrives. It's aiming for a complete mastery of physical action over mental debate.
And this deep commitment to strenuous embodied practice must also shape the culture's view of difficulty itself. If the goal is this deep bodily knowledge, then the path should be difficult, right?
Absolutely. Under what's called Seishin-based education, education focused on forging spirit or character through hardship, difficulties are viewed entirely positively. They're not seen as barriers to be overcome by, say, better tools or more comfortable facilities.
They're not obstacles to remove.
They are the essential mechanism for growth. The struggle is the curriculum. There's a deeply ingrained cultural assumption that practicing asceticism, pushing through hardship, is actually necessary for discovering fundamental truth. And the more severe the practice, the greater the consequence. The deeper the insight, the bigger the reward.
So pain and friction aren't problems to be engineered away. They're almost proof that you're on the right path, proof of progress. We seem to be always seeking to minimize effort. They seem to be maximizing consequential, meaningful effort.
That's a very accurate way to put it. Successfully resisting temptation, or mastering a difficult skill through ceaseless asceticism and demanding physical repetition. This is considered the path to attaining a peaceful reward, a form of enlightenment or true mastery. The struggle, the pain, the mind-numbing repetition, all of this is considered essential for genuine progress in any due form. Think of the novice monk enduring cold and hunger, or the aspiring martial artist repeating a single move thousands of times. If the path were easy, the knowledge gained would be cheap, superficial, and therefore insufficient to truly conquer the self.
Okay, speaking of conquering the self, how does this intense, very internal, individual discipline integrate with the collective supportive group setting we talked about with Okagesama? How do you maintain this ascetic individual practice while also conforming to the demands of the collective cage, the group shadow?
That's a crucial point. In the group context, Seishin education, the spirit forging, actively sponsors outward conformity to group standards. This is where the individual challenge meets the collective structure. Nonconformity isn't celebrated as refreshing uniqueness or individuality. It's often viewed as a sign of individual character weakness, or worse, selfishness. And that selfishness is often called ga.
Ga, G-A.
Yes, ga. It represents the ego, the selfish impulse.
Yeah.
So if I were in that group setting and I prioritized my own speaking time, my own narrative, my need for attention over the group's collective needs and rules.
I'd be exhibiting ga, a failure of discipline.
Precisely. You'd be showing a failure to control your ga. And the training within these groups is often deliberately designed to help members restrain this selfishness. In large Danshukai meetings, for instance, there's often a very specific disciplined practice, strictly limiting the speaking time allowed for every single attendee.
Like timekeeping.
Rigorous timekeeping. If you have 100 people in the room and everyone gets exactly 2 minutes, no more, That forces each speaker to conquer their guy. They simply cannot dominate the floor. They can't indulge in long, rambling personal histories. They can't monopolize the time-seeking validation. They must communicate only what is essential, what serves the group, ensuring that every single attendee has an equal chance to share in the cage, the supportive shadow of that collective group space.
And that act of restraint, of conforming to the time limit, that is the act of spiritual progress for the individual. It's a small victory over the self that allows the person to both benefit from and contribute back to the collective.
Yes, exactly. And this is fundamentally different from, say, the Western notion of confession or repentance often found in recovery. Western recovery often focuses on external acts, confessing a sin, admitting powerlessness, asking for forgiveness from others or a higher power. In the Japanese model, particularly with Danshukai and Shugich, members are pushed towards Hapse, which is deep internal reflection. They reflect on the internal mental weakness, the ga, the selfishness that led to the problematic behavior like drinking. It's an internal psychological adjustment, a quiet conquest of the selfish self.
So it's less about external absolution and more about internal mastery.
It's about internal mastery achieved through discipline. It is the victory over ga, achieved through the hard work of Shugich, that demonstrates true progress. And importantly, this mastery prepares the individual to operate effectively and humbly within the collective support system, the very system they acknowledged and thanked with Okagesama at the beginning. You have to master yourself, conquer your ga, so that the shadow of the group can protect you, and so that you, in turn, can contribute your own small part to that protective shadow for others. #outro.
Okay, so bringing this whole discussion full circle right back to that awards dinner scenario, my American colleague's passionate speech, that was the perfect narrative of the redemptive self, achieved through sheer individual will. He was the hero who overcame the odds, standing alone.
The star of his own movie.
Exactly. And the Japanese executive's quiet bow, her brief words, that was the living demonstration of Okagesama. And it was rooted in this deep philosophy of Shugyu that intensely practiced cultural belief in the unseen collective support that makes the final visible action possible. She wasn't just being humble for effect. She was actually demonstrating a mastered philosophy, wasn't she?
That's how it appears, yes. What she was demonstrating was the logical outcome of a system that measures value differently based on sustained contribution to the collective stability and acknowledgement of it.
Yeah.
I think the core takeaway here is that the shadow, the cage in Okagesama, it's not a passive thing. It's not just luck or a coincidence. It represents the active, vast, supportive foundation that's built by continuous, often unseen, collective effort and deep cultural discipline.
It's the structure itself.
It is the structure. Her strength in that moment was presented as born not necessarily of individualistic genius or some singular act of heroic transformation, but of the mastery of self gained through practices like Shugi, and the profound understanding that personal success is utterly inseparable from the enabling environment and the collective. That humble, quiet thanks acknowledged this entire comprehensive system of support. It proved that what initially seemed anticlimactic or maybe even weak to an outside observer,
Yeah, to me at the time,
was, within its own cultural context, arguably a far profounder achievement because it acknowledged the whole, the structural reality, not just the individual point.
the power of Okagesama then is really the ability to see, and perhaps more importantly, to value the supporting structure, that shadow, just as much as, if not more than, the individual object casting the light.